Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really complex but honestly fascinating system, the endocrine system.
Yeah, it's fundamental.
We've got this stack of review questions here. That's our source material. And the mission really is to pull out those key knowledge nuggets they're focused on.
Get you up to speed quickly.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this.
So what jumps out from these questions is how the system uses hormones, those chemical messengers, to manage just, well, an incredible range of things.
Right.
We're talking your energy levels, growth, how you handle stress. The source questions really hammer home its wide reach.
Yeah, it's like this body-wide communication network. But, different from the nervous system speed. This is more broadcast signals in the blood.
A bit slower, generally.
This is lower, yeah. And these questions really zero in on the hypothalamus. It's not just some brain part. It's like the main control center for the whole endocrine show.
The conductor pulling it together.
And the sources show it controls things in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Releasing its own hormones or even sending direct nerve signals.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the hypothalamus is that key link between your brain, your nervous system, and these hormone glands.
Okay.
And the source questions seem really focused on its connection with the pituitary gland. People call the pituitary the master gland, but these questions, they kind of suggest the hypothalamus is the real puppeteer.
Ah, pulling the strings. Okay. And how it talks to the pituitary, that seems like a big deal in these questions.
Definitely.
Like the anterior pituitary, the sources mention this unique setup, a portal system.
Right, a special blood vessel network.
So it's not just general circulation, it's like a dedicated hotline, making sure those hypothalamic hormones hit the anterior pituitary directly, really concentrated.
Keeps the signal strong and precise.
Which is critical, the questions imply, for controlling all those hormones the anterior pituitary sends out, to the thyroid, adrenals, for growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you contract that with the posterior pituitary. The source questions frame it differently.
How?
Well, they point out it's basically just nerve tissue extending down from the hypothalamus. It doesn't make hormones itself.
Oh, okay, so the hypothalamus makes them.
Sends them down nerve fibers, and the posterior pituitary just stores and releases them, like ADH for water balance or oxytocin. Totally different control mechanism than that portal system for the anterior part.
Got it. Different strategies. And speaking of direct nerve control, the questions also bring up the adrenal medulla, right?
Good example, yeah.
That seems like the nervous system directly hitting an endocrine gland for pure speed.
Exactly. When you get startled, bam, hypothalamus sends nerve signals straight there.
Bypassing the slower hormone routes.
Right, to just dump adrenaline, noradrenaline straight into the blood. Instant fight or flight. The questions must be contrasting that speed.
Makes sense. Which brings us to, well, a core idea these questions seem to keep coming back to, control. These feedback loops.
Yes, crucial concept. They almost certainly test negative feedback heavily. That's the main thermostat.
Right. Hormone levels get too high, or their effect does, and that signals back, hey, dial it down.
Exactly. Maintains balance, homeostasis. The source probably mentions positive feedback too, though it's rarer.
Like that hormone surge before ovulation, or during labor, where the signal actually boosts the response for a bit.
Precisely. Pushes something to completion.
And it seems like when these feedback loops break down, that's where the source questions go next, into dysfunction.
Makes sense.
They probably have scenarios like hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism, showing how too much or too little thyroid hormone messes up that whole axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, throwing metabolism off.
Or diabetes questions. Problems with insulin or glucagon messing up the glucose feedback between the pancreas, liver, muscles.
Yeah.
So understanding these feedback loops, negative and positive, which are clearly vital in these questions, that's the key takeaway. It's not just gland A does X. It's how A, B, and C interact and regulate each other constantly.
Thinking dynamically.
Yes.
Yeah.
These questions are pushing for that interconnected view.
Okay, so wrapping up our journey through these endocrine system review questions, we've seen the huge scope of hormone communication, the hypothalamus as the central command.
The different ways it controls the anterior and posterior pituitary.
Right, that portal system versus nerve storage. Then the rapid neuroendocrine link, like the adrenal medulla.
And underpinning it all, those critical feedback loops for maintaining balance.
And what happens like with thyroid issues or diabetes when that balance is lost.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, grasping these points from the source material really shows how much our everyday state, energy, mood, growth, reactions relies on this incredibly precise, constantly adjusting chemical conversation in our bodies.
This raises an important question.
How can tiny shifts or disruptions in one part of this vast feedback network ripple out and have such, well, profound effects everywhere else? Sometimes in ways you wouldn't immediately link to hormones. It makes you think about the elegance, but also maybe the fragility of keeping that chemical balance just right. All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something fascinating, the nervous system.
Absolutely. It's like the body's, well, it's high-speed internet, right?
Totally. And we're using a set of review questions as our map, kind of. The mission is simple. Unpack the key bits so you get a really clear picture.
Okay, let's do it.
So starting big picture. The nervous system, it's split in two, yeah.
Right. You got the central nervous system, the CNS, that's the command center.
Brain and spinal cord, protected by bone.
Exactly. Then everything branching out from there, that's the peripheral nervous system, or PNS.
All the nerves going out to your fingers, toes, organs, everywhere.
Pretty much. It connects the CNS to, well, everything else.
So functionally, it's like a two-way street. Information coming in, commands going out.
Precisely. You have the sensory division that's afferent, bringing information in.
From your skin, muscles, even internal organs, like status reports.
Yeah, exactly. Telling the CNS what's going on. Then you have the motor division efferent, sending commands out.
And that splits too, right? Like voluntary actions versus automatic stuff.
Somatic motor controls your skeletal muscles, the things you consciously move.
Like waving your hand.
Right. And the autonomic motor system handles the involuntary stuff. Heartbeat, digestion, breathing.
Wow. So it's just this constant hum of signals back and forth all the time.
Non-stop. And the core players in all this are the cells. Neurons are the main communicators.
Signal transmitters.
Yep. And then you have glial cells, the support crew. Hugely important.
Okay, neurons. They have specific parts for their job, right? Dendrites, axon.
That's right. Dendrites usually receive signals, the cell body processes them, and the axon sends the signal onward. It's built for communication.
And the glial cells you mentioned. They're more than just packing peanuts, I take it.
Oh, much more. They provide physical support, nutrients, they clean up waste, but they're also key for repair.
Repair. I thought neurons didn't really regenerate.
Well, in the PNS, they actually can regenerate under the right conditions, and specific glial cells are crucial for guiding that regrowth.
Huh, that's interesting. So there is some capacity for repair with help.
Limited, but yes. It really highlights how vital those glial cells are.
Okay, let's talk speed. Because nerve signals are fast, like incredibly fast. Myelin is involved here.
Definitely. Myelin is this fatty sheath wrapped around many axons. Think of it like insulation.
But it does more than just insulate, doesn't it?
It does. It allows the electrical signal, the nerve impulse, to sort of leapfrog down the axon between gaps in the myelin.
Ah, saltatory conductor.
Yeah, that's the term. And it makes the signal travel, well, potentially up to 100 times faster. It's a huge difference.
100 times. Wow. Okay, so what is that signal, that nerve impulse? It's electrical.
Fundamentally, yes. It's an electrical event called an action potential. It happens because charged particles, ions, like sodium and potassium, rapidly move across the neuron's membrane.
Like flipping a switch, creating a wave of electrical change.
Kind of, yeah. A very fast wave down the axon. And just as important is the reset afterwards. Special pumps move those ions back, getting the neuron ready to fire again almost instantly.
Okay, so that's how the signal travels along one neuron. Fast. But how does it get to the next one? There's a gap, right?
There is. It's called the synapse, or the synaptic cleft, that little gap. The electrical signal can't just jump it.
So what happens?
At most synapses, when the electrical impulse reaches the end of the axon, the synaptic knob, it triggers the release of chemicals.
Neurotransmitters.
Exactly. Little sacs called vesicles release these neurotransmitters into the gap. They float across and bind to receptors on the next neuron.
And that binding starts the signal in the next cell.
It can, yes. It triggers a response, potentially a new electrical signal in the receiving neuron. So you go from electrical to chemical, then back to electrical.
And that chemical step is important.
Crucial. It ensures the signal goes one way, and it allows for modulation, like turning the volume up or down, or even changing the message slightly, is how your brain talks to your body, coordinating everything.
It's just mind-blowing. The whole system, from the big CNS-PNS split down to the glial cells helping with repairs, the myelin speed boost, and this intricate chemical handshake at the synapse.
It really is. We've covered the structure, the cell types, the incredible speed, how impulses work, and how neurons connect.
So wrapping up, when you think about all this complex information, sensory data, commands, thoughts, flying around your nervous system every single second, what strikes you as the most remarkable piece of it all?
That's tough. Maybe it's the sheer coordination, how all these different parts, the electrical speed, the chemical nuance, the support cells, how they all have to work perfectly together. What if we think about malfunctions? Even a tiny issue at a synapse can have huge effects. It really shows how every single component is vital, you know? It makes you appreciate the resilience, but also the fragility of the whole network. Welcome to a new deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty fundamental, the human brain.
Absolutely fundamental.
We've got this stack of notes and excerpts here, specifically from a source titled Introduction to Brain Anatomy and Function. Seems to map things out really well. Okay, let's unpack this material you brought. So, our mission here is to go through this particular set of notes and pull out the key ideas it highlights. You know, what the brain's made of, where the big parts are, what this source says they do. Just trying to get that essential lay of the land based only on these notes, sort of finding the core info without getting totally bogged down.
Exactly. And this material, it's a fantastic starting point for that.
Yeah.
It focuses on the major regions, some key structures, the protective bits. Understanding these building blocks, just as they're presented here, is a really good first step.
Okay.
We'll explore some of that key what's and where from the source, and just enough of the why it matters that comes straight from these pages.
Yeah. Great. So based on your notes, we'll cover the main brain regions, look at gray and white matter differences, touch on areas like the diencephalon and brainstem, what this source says their jobs are, and even the protective layers described. Ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So the first thing the source jumps into is the 6 major regions. Then it immediately asks about the 5 lobes of the cerebrum, right? The frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, and the insula. What's interesting is how the notes connect these familiar areas straight to functions, like frontal lobe for planning or occipital for vision. It gives you that instant where meets what.
Right. And just after that, the material dives into the brain's actual composition, specifically gray matter versus white matter.
Okay.
The notes explain that gray matter is basically where the neuron cell bodies are clustered, found in the cortex, the outer layer, and also deeper structures the source calls nuclei.
Ah, nuclei.
Yeah.
So bundles of cell bodies, the sort of thinking stuff, you could say. And then the white matter. What does this source say about that part?
Well, according to these notes, white matter is the myelinated axons, those long bits of the neurons bundled into what the source calls tracks.
Tracks, okay.
Yeah, like the brain's wiring, essentially.
Yeah.
Communication cables carrying signals between different areas. And the notes show this is mostly under the cortex, making all those connections.
Got it. It also points out structures kind of tucked within all that, like the ventricle is described as fluid-filled cavities, 4 of them mentioned here,
The CSF-filled cavities.
and the basal nuclei, which your notes link to movement control, plus that huge band of white matter connecting the hemispheres of corpus callosum, and of course the cortex itself, that outer gray layer.
Then moving a bit deeper, the material guides us under the cerebrum to the diencephalon. It names 3 key parts: thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus.
Okay, and what jobs does the source give these 3?
Well, the notes call the thalamus a major relay station. It processes most sensory info before sending it on, but interestingly, notes smell is the exception.
Huh, okay. Smell bypasses it, according to this. What about the hypothalamus?
That one, according to this material, is crucial. Regulates basic body functions, temperature, hunger, thirst, and it links the nervous system to the endocrine system.
Wow, yeah, those are absolutely critical survival functions. And the epithalamus, what's its role here?
The notes identified as the smallest part containing the pineal gland, and basically state it connects the diencephalon to the midbrain.
Which is part of the brainstem. So speaking of the brainstem, where does the source place it and what are its components?
Right. The notes put the brainstem below the diencephalon. It connects the cerebrum and diencephalon down to the spinal cord, and it mentions 3 parts: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata.
And the source details some incredibly vital functions for these, doesn't it? Life support, almost.
Oh, absolutely. Midbrain handles visual and auditory reflexes. The pons is described as relaying information and helping with breathing regulation. And the medulla oblongata is presented as vital controlling heart rate, breathing rhythm, blood pressure, basic life functions.
Stuff you don't even think about.
Exactly. Happening automatically thanks to this area.
Okay, and we can't forget the cerebellum. Your notes position it at the back, under the occipital and temporal lobes. What's its main job, according to this text?
The primary role outlined here for the cerebellum is coordinating movement, making sure you have balance, maintaining posture. It's about refining actions, not starting them.
Refining, okay. The notes also bring up the limbic system involved in emotion, memory, motivation, it says. Now, here's something the specific source highlights that caught my eye.
Oh.
Yeah, it mentions a direct link between the limbic system and olfaction, our sense of smell, explicitly connecting smell to these powerful emotional and memory centers. That really stands out from this material.
Yes, that specific connection noted in your notes is quite fascinating. It really underscores how integrated these systems are, even in this introductory view. And finally, the material does touch on protection for the central nervous system.
Right, multiple layers of defense. First, the obvious. The skull and vertebral column, the bony protection. Then it details the three meninge, those tissue layers covering everything. Dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater, between the bone and the brain itself.
And the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, don't forget that. These notes describe it as this cushioning fluid made in the ventricles, circulating through them and around the brain and spinal cord. Adds buoyancy, protection.
Like a shock absorber.
Exactly. Plus, the blood-brain barrier is highlighted. A critical mechanism, the source says, protecting the brain from potentially harmful things in the blood. It also gives brief definitions for things like concussion, Parkinson's, and lists the 12 cranial nerves, noting sensory versus motor.
And that pretty much wraps up our exploration of this introductory material on brain anatomy and function based purely on your notes. We've gone from the major regions it mentions, touched on gray and white matter, the diencephalon, the brainstem, the cerebellum's role, and even looked at the protective layers and fluid described in the text. Yeah, it's amazing how much grounds this specific source covers, giving us a real shortcut to the brain's basic layout and functions as it presents them. You know, from the lobes doing different things to the brainstem handling life support, each part highlighted has its role.
Right.
And that detail from these notes about the limbic system's direct tie to smell, that really is a key takeaway here.
Yes, that connection is a great example of the specific insights in this material. We also saw how the source emphasizes protection. The bone, meninges, CSF, the blood-brain barrier. It shows how well guarded this vital organ is, according to this text.
So what does all this mean for you looking at the source material?
Well, it gives you that core vocabulary and map presented right here in these notes. It's a definite starting point to see how this source breaks down the areas and suggests how they contribute to who we are, which, based on how these notes lay things out, raises an interesting question to maybe think about. While the source neatly divides the brain into parts with functions, how does it really work as this seamless, interconnected whole where everything is constantly talking to everything else? That's something to ponder, building on this foundational look. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about your body, not just as parts, but as this incredibly fast network. And right at the heart of it, the spinal cord. It's like the main highway and sometimes an express lane.
Exactly.
So today, using the sources we've got, we're really going to explore its structure, its function, and figure out why it's built the way it is. Especially how it pulls off those super fast reactions, without even needing the brain's okay first.
That's the fascinating part. It's not just a cable. Its design is really optimized for speed, especially for those automatic protective reflexes. The layout itself is the key.
All right, so let's place it first. Where exactly does this thing run, start to finish?
Okay, so it kicks off right at the base of your skull. There's a big opening there, the foramen magnum, that's the starting point. And then it runs down inside your backbone, the vertebral column, usually ending around the level of your lower back, maybe the first or second lumbar vertebra.
Lower back, okay. And something that vital must be really well protected, right?
Oh, absolutely. First line of defense is the bone itself, the vertebrae stacked up.
Makes sense.
Then inside that, you've got these protective layers, membranes called meninges. There's the tough outer one, dura mater.
Right.
The web-like arachnoid mater, and then the very delicate pia mater right against the cord.
Wow, layers upon layers.
There's fluid, too. Cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, bathing it all, acting like a cushion.
Shock absorber.
Seriously protected then. Okay, so if we took a slice, looked at a cross-section, what's the internal layout like?
You'd see a really clear pattern. The outside area is mostly white matter.
White matter. Why white?
It's largely nerve fibers, axons, wrapped in myelin. That myelin sheath is fatty, looks white, and it acts like insulation on a wire. It lets signals shoot up and down the cord really fast. Think communication to and from the brain.
Gotcha. Fast lanes. And the inside?
The inside is gray matter, often looks like a butterfly or maybe an H. This is different stuff. It's packed with neuron cell bodies, synapses. This is where the sort of local processing happens within the cord. Okay, an H shape. And that each has specific zones.
It does. The parts pointing to the back are the posterior or dorsal gray horns. The ones pointing to the front are the anterior or ventral gray horns.
Posterior dorsals for back, anterior ventral for front. Got it.
And right in the middle of the H, there's a tiny channel, the central canal, filled with that CSF2.
Okay, so this is the hub. How do the actual nerves connect? How do signals get in and out?
Right. It's very organized. Nerves connect via specific routes. They don't just plug in anywhere.
And the source mentioned two main types of roots, yeah?
Yes. Crucial distinction. Every spinal nerve, and you have 31 pairs of them branching off the cord, is formed when two roots join together just outside the cord. You've got the dorsal root at the back and the ventral root at the front.
And they carry different kinds of traffic. This seems important.
Absolutely fundamental. The dorsal root is strictly for incoming information. Sensory neurons bringing signals in from your body touch, pain, temperature, that kind of thing.
Sensory IN through the dorsal root.
And the ventral root is strictly for outgoing commands. Motor neurons sending signals out to your muscles and glands, telling them to do something.
So, like dedicated on-ramps and off-ramps keeps things flowing smoothly.
Exactly. Separating the traffic right at the source is super efficient.
Makes sense. And the control setters for these neurons, the cell bodies, where are they?
Good question, because it matters for speed, too. For the sensory neurons coming in the dorsal root, their cell bodies are clustered in a little bulge on that root, just outside the cord, called the dorsal root ganglion.
Outside the cord for sensory.
Okay. For the motor neurons going out, their cell bodies are located inside the spinal cord, right there in that anterior gray horn, the front part of the H.
Oh, okay. So the go command starts right from inside the gray matter.
Precisely. And the interneurons, the connectors between other neurons, their cell bodies are also within the gray matter.
Right. And these spinal nerves, they branch out everywhere, forming the peripheral nervous system, connecting everything up. What about dermatomes? The source mentioned that briefly.
Yeah, a dermatome is just a specific patch of skin that gets its main nerve supply from a single spinal nerve root. It's like a map. If you lose feeling in one area, doctors can often tell which spinal nerve might be having an issue.
Useful map.
Yeah.
Okay, let's connect this to the real world. Lumbar puncture, a spinal tap. They're collecting that CSF, right? What layers does that needle actually go through?
Yeah, to get to the CSF in what's called the subarachnoid space, that's between the arachnoid and pia mater, the needle has to pass through your skin. Then fat and ligaments, the epidural space, which is outside the dura, and then pierce the tough dura motor and the finer arachnoid mater. It really shows you how protected that cord is.
Definitely highlights the protection. Okay, so all this structure, the gray matter, the white matter, the separate roots, the neuron locations, it seems to build towards this key efficiency.
Yeah.
The reflex arc, what is that exactly?
The reflex arc is basically the wiring diagram for a reflex. You know, that super fast automatic reaction like yanking your hand off a hot stove before you even consciously feel the pain.
Yeah, those happen instantly.
That's the reflex arc at work. Typically, it involves a sensory neuron bringing the danger signal in.
Through the dorsal root.
Right. Then, often, an interneuron within the gray matter acts as a quick relay. And finally, a motor neuron sends the move command out.
Through the ventral root to the muscle. Okay, so what's the big speed advantage here? What's the shortcut?
This is the really cool part the source highlights. In many reflex arcs, that sensory neuron talks directly to the motor neuron, or maybe through just one interneuron, right there in the spinal cord's gray matter.
Wait, so the signal doesn't go all the way up to the brain?
Nope. It bypasses the main command center entirely for that initial urgent response. The processing is local, right there in the cord.
Wow, so it skips the whole trip up, brain deliberation, trip back down.
Exactly. And that saves critical time. Milliseconds matter when it comes to avoiding damage. Sending it to the brain for conscious thought takes way longer. By using that direct connection in the gray matter, where the motor neuron cell body is already sitting.
In the anterior horn.
The reaction is almost instantaneous. It's a survival mechanism built into the wiring.
So pulling it all together, the spinal cord structure isn't just random, it's perfectly designed for this.
Absolutely. The protection, the white matter tracks for longer routes, the central gray matter for local processing, the separated routes for clear traffic flow, the specific neuron locations. It all enables these incredibly fast automatic reflex arcs. It's a built-in shortcut system.
An internal express lane for emergencies. The body handles the immediate threat locally, freeing up the brain. That's pretty amazing, engineer.
It really is. Makes you think, doesn't it? How often your body reacts to protect you using these pathways without you even having to consciously decide anything. It's constantly working in the background. Okay, so Let's jump in. You've brought us some really interesting material today, all about the human sensory systems.
That's right. How our bodies gather all that information about the world around us.
Yeah, it's something we do constantly, right? Every single second. But when you actually look at how it works,
Yep.
wow, it's incredibly complex.
Absolutely. And, it's more than just the five senses we usually list off. They really form the bedrock of our whole conscious experience.
Translating all those physical things like light and sound and chemical signals.
Exactly. Into the rich, detailed perception we have of, well, everything.
So that's what we're doing today, digging into this material, pulling out some key mechanisms behind sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and balance too.
Yeah, exploring some of the maybe surprising mechanics behind it all.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how your body doesn't just passively receive stuff.
It's actively processing right from the start.
Pretty much, yeah. Interpreting signals from the get-go.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe the general senses, like touch, temperature, that kind of thing.
Good place to start. Your notes mention receptor types, but one really key idea is adaptation.
Adaptation. Right, that's how receptors sort of tune out constant information.
Exactly, they adjust. Think about putting on your watch. You feel it at first, right?
Yeah, definitely. Or my glasses.
Right. But pretty soon, you don't really notice it constantly. Those receptors have quieted down. They stop sending that watch is here signal.
Which lets you focus on changes like if it slips or something, smart filtering.
Mm-hmm. It's efficient.
And your source also mentioned referred pain. That's a strange one. Where you feel pain somewhere different from the actual problem.
Precisely. Like the classic example, arm pain during a heart attack.
How does that even happen?
Well, basically, the nerve signals from some internal organs travel along the same pathways in the spinal cord as signals from certain skin areas.
Okay.
So the brain, which is, more used to getting signals from the skin via that pathway, gets confused. It interprets the signal from the organ as coming from the skin instead.
Ah, so it's like a mapping error in the brain's wiring.
You could say that, a sort of neurological crossed wire.
Wild. Okay, moving on. Chemical senses. Smell and taste. Smell is interesting because it has a really direct route to the brain, doesn't it?
It really does. Your olfactory receptors are way up high in your nasal cavity. They bind to odor molecules in the air.
And the neurons connected to them.
They travel directly to the olfactory bulb, which is part of the brain. There's no intermediate relay station like with most other senses.
No thalamus stopover.
Nope. Straight shot.
Maybe that's why smells can trigger such strong memories or emotions sometimes, that direct line.
That's a very common theory, yes. The link is quite strong.
Okay, what about taste? We have taste buds, obviously.
Right. And inside those taste buds are gustatory cells. They're the chemoreceptors for taste.
So chemicals from food dissolve in saliva.
Mm-hmm. And they enter a little opening, the taste pore, in the bud. That activates these gustatory cells.
And they send signals for sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami.
Exactly. Those are the main sensations detected by these chemical interactions.
Fascinating. Now let's switch gears to the ear, because it handles two completely different things, right?
Correct. Hearing and balance. And interestingly, both rely on the same type of receptor, mechanoreceptors.
The mechanoreceptors, they respond to physical movement or pressure.
Yes. Mechanical force.
So walk us through hearing. How does a sound wave become something we understand?
Okay. So sound waves first enter the outer ear, travel down the canal, and hit the eardrum. That makes it vibrate.
And those vibrations get passed along?
Yes. They're transferred and actually amplified by three tiny bones in the middle ear. The malleus, indicus, and stapes, often called the hammer, anvil, and stirrup.
Right, the ossicles, tiny amplifiers.
They transmit the vibration to a membrane covering an opening to the inner ear.
And the inner ear is where the real sensory part is.
That's where the cochlea is. Inside this snail-shaped structure, the vibrations cause fluid to move. And this moving fluid stimulates tiny hair cells. These are located in something called the organ of Corti.
Those are the mechanoreceptors for hearing.
Yes. They bend when the fluid moves, and that bending action converts the mechanical energy into electrical signals.
Which then travel up the auditory nerve to the brain. Incredible.
It's a really sophisticated conversion process.
Okay, so what about the other job? Balance.
Right. Equilibrium. That's handled by other structures, also in the inner ear. The semicircular canals, and the vestibule.
And they also use hair cells.
They do. Hair cells, again, embedded in a sort of jelly-like substance.
Do they sense different kinds of movement?
Exactly. The semicircular canals, there are three. Arranged in different planes, they detect rotational movements, like shaking your head no, or nodding, or tilting side to side, or spinning.
And the vestibule.
That detects linear acceleration, like moving forward or backward, up or down, and also your head's position relative to gravity. Are you upright, tilted, upside down?
Ah, okay. That explains that weird feeling after you spin around really fast and then stop.
Yes. The fluid inside those semicircular canals keeps swirling for a moment because of inertia.
Even though you've stopped moving.
Right. So those hair cells keep bending, sending signals to your brain that you're still spinning. Hence the dizziness.
Your brain's getting lagging information. Makes sense.
Precisely.
All right, last one. Vision. Probably the sense we rely on most consciously. How do our eyes manage to build such a detailed picture of the world?
Well, it starts with light, obviously.
Yeah.
Light enters through the cornea, that clear dome at the very front.
And the iris, the colored part, controls how much light gets in.
Yeah, by changing the size of the pupil, the black hole in the center, then the light passes through the lens.
Which focuses the light.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
focuses the light onto the retina, which lines the back of the eye.
And the retina is the light-sensitive layer, right? That's where the receptors are.
Yes, the retina contains the photoreceptor cells. Two main types,
Yeah.
rods and cones.
Rods for low-light black and white vision.
Very sensitive, yes. And cones for color vision and detail. But they need more light to work well.
So they convert the light energy into neural signals.
Correct. Those signals are then processed by other layers of cells right there in the retina before being sent out of the eye through the optic nerve.
Okay, and the optic nerve carries it to the brain. Is there anything special about that pathway?
There is, actually. The optic nerves from each eye meet at a point called the optic chiasm. And here, some of the nerve fibers cross over.
They cross. Why?
So fibers carrying information from the right half of the visual field of both eyes end up going to the left hemisphere of the brain. And information from the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere.
Ah, so each side of the brain gets input from both eyes, but covering one half of your total view.
Exactly. This crossover, this integration is absolutely crucial for things like depth perception and just generally understanding the spatial layout of the world.
Wow. When you step back and think about all these different systems, from a simple touch receptor getting used to pressure, to the ear turning vibrations into sound and tracking balance, to the eye capturing light, and the brain weaving it all together,
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? It really highlights how our bodies are constantly actively constructing our reality from this flood of raw sensory data.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering just how intricate and frankly specific the mechanics are for receiving and interpreting even a single signal, what does this complexity tell you about how incredibly unique your personal experience of the world must actually be? Okay, let's get into it. We're doing a deep dive today into the human urinary system using this specific review document you sent over.
Right.
And really, our mission is to pull out the key stuff from the source just to give you a clear picture of how this whole system works. It's handling some really critical jobs for the body.
Absolutely. It's basically the body's high-tech filtration plant. Understanding it, like how the document lays out the parts and processes, is just fundamental for health, keeping everything in balance.
Definitely. So for this dive, we'll trace that fluid path through the big players, the kidneys, then the ureters, the bladder for storage, and finally out through the urethra. Let's maybe zero in on the kidneys first, because they're doing, well, more than just filtering, apparently. This review notes they produce two hormones that kind of caught my eye.
It did, yeah. It shows they're not just passive filters. And the document touches on the anatomy needed for all this. You've got the outer part, the renal cortex. Think of that as the main processing zone.
Okay, the cortex.
Then deeper in, there's the renal medulla. That part's crucial for concentrating the urine, getting the salt balance right. And finally, the renal pelvis. It's like a funnel, collecting the urine and leading it into the calyces, which then channel it towards the ureter.
Right. So how does the actual filtering work? It sounds complex. The document mentions the blood flow path and this idea of the kidney's functional unit.
Yeah, the functional unit, the nephron, that's really the microscopic powerhouse.
Yeah.
The review asks about its key parts, the renal corpuscle and the renal tubule.
Corpuscle and tube, you got it.
So the corpuscle, mostly up in the cortex, that's like the initial sieve. Blood pressure forces fluid and small stuff through, but holds back blood cells, big proteins.
Okay, like a first pass filter.
Exactly. This early filtrate then goes into the renal tubule. This tubule winds through both the cortex and medulla, and that's where the fine-tuning happens. Yeah, reclaiming Useful things, the body needs glucose, water, salts, they get pulled back into the blood. Waste products, they stay in, or some even get added. That's how you turn that initial filtrate into, well, urine.
Wow. Okay. So once the kidneys have done all that complex work, the urine needs to get out. What's the path?
Right. So from the kidneys, it flows down the 2 ureters. These aren't just passive tubes, mind you. They have muscles that contract, kind of gently push the urine along.
Pushing it towards the bladder, I assume.
Towards the bladder, yeah, the storage tank. And the bladder itself is pretty neat. The document mentions specific features.
Like what?
Well, the rugae, those are folds inside. They let the bladder stretch, like a lot as it fills up.
Okay. Like pleats.
Sort of, yeah. And then there's the trigone. It's this smooth triangular patch at the base. The ureters plug in there, and the urethra exits from there. Its structure helps stop urine backing up into the ureters.
Makes sense. And actually emptying the bladder, that's controlled, right? The
yeah.
review brought up muscles.
Oh, definitely controlled. Usually there are 2 sphincters. There's an internal one, smooth muscle, so it's involuntary, you don't think about it.
Yeah.
And then an external one, skeletal muscle. That's the one you can consciously control, for holding it or deciding when to go.
Right, the voluntary one. That dual control sounds essential.
It really is. For continence, basically.
Okay, so let's wrap this part up. Based on this review document, we've touched on the main organs: kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra. We dove into the kidney structure, the cortex, medulla, pelvis, and that crucial functional unit doing the filtration. And then we followed the path out, looking at the bladder's features like rugae and the trigone, plus those important sphincter muscles.
Yeah, and when you put all those pieces together, the intricate filtering, the expandable storage, the controlled release, you really see this incredibly adapted system. It's nonstop cleaning your blood, keeping that internal balance just right.
It really makes you think. Here's something maybe for you, the listener, to consider. Just picture the sheer amount of blood your kidneys process every day, constantly sorting, filtering, recycling what's needed, ditching the waste. How does that relentless kind of hidden work highlight the body's amazing efficiency? Pretty incredible when you stop and think about it, isn't it?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really diving into some core human biology and health topics.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We're drawing straight from the sources you shared with us.
Exactly. So we've got material covering human reproductive systems, hormones, contraception, and importantly, STIs.
And our goal really is to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising details from that material for you.
We'll look at the basic structures, that intricate hormonal dance, different ways to approach family planning.
And crucial info on infections, all based on the specific material provided.
Okay, so let's start unpacking it. Your sources kick off with the gonads, the primary reproductive organs.
Right, producing sex cells via meiosis. But what seemed interesting in the source was the detail on the male gonads, the testes.
Yeah. What specifically?
Well, it wasn't just that they make sperm, but where they start. The source highlighted they form inside the abdomen first.
Oh, right, and then descend later in gestation.
Exactly. And the source really emphasized why that descent is critical, because sperm production needs that lower temperature.
Lower than core body temp. That external location is key. Felt like the source really wanted to hammer that point home.
Definitely a physiological necessity it focused on.
And then the material walks through the male ducts and the accessory glands, seminal vesicles, prostate.
Subarachnoid glands, yeah. But it wasn't just a list.
No.
No, the source detailed what their fluids actually do. Specific things like fructose for energy, alkaline stuff to neutralize the vaginal environment.
Ah, right, and clotting factors too.
Yes. It really underscored how complex that ejaculate fluid is. More than just transport, it's like a whole support system.
It's incredibly integrated, isn't it?
Okay.
Let's switch to the female system. The ovary is the primary gonad there.
And your sources brought up the unique timeline for oogenesis, especially compared to sperm production.
What stood out in the material on that?
Well, the timing of meiosis was striking. The sources stressed that it starts prenatally, then pauses.
Pauses in prophase, right?
Oh,
3
yeah.
years, potentially.
Exactly. And it only fully completes much, much later if fertilization actually happens. That long pause and conditional finish felt like a major point the source was driving at.
Okay, and this leads right into the hormones, which is where things get really intricate.
Oh, definitely. The sources went deep into the hormonal regulation, especially in the female cycle.
It wasn't just listing hormones. It showed the interplay, like GnRH pulses from the hypothalamus triggering the pituitary.
Which then releases FSH and LH, signaling the ovaries. Yeah.
And connecting that back, the source really showed how this precise rhythmic communication drives the whole cycle.
Absolutely. It's not just making estrogen and progesterone. It's the timing and those feedback loops the material described.
Like high estrogen inhibiting FSH at first, but then causing that LH surge later.
Precisely. That surge triggers ovulation. The source seemed to be emphasizing just how critical that delicate balance is for, follicles developing and the egg being released.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but totally related. Contraception. Your sources laid out the different types.
Right. Chemical methods like pills affecting hormones,
Barrier methods, condoms, diaphragms, physically blocking.
and then surgical options, vasectomies, tubal ligations.
But the material stressed something important here, didn't it? About effectiveness.
It really did. Effectiveness varies a lot, and crucially, preventing pregnancy is different from preventing STIs.
That's a key distinction.
Yeah. While hormonal methods might be great for pregnancy prevention, the source explicitly pointed to barrier methods, especially condoms.
As being essential for STI protection. That difference was highlighted.
Definitely a major takeaway from that section.
And speaking of STIs, your sources broke them down by cause: viral, bacterial, parasitic.
And the key difference the source pointed out was in treatment.
How so?
Well, bacterial and parasitic ones, often treatable with antibiotics or antiparasitics, but the viral ones...
Like HIV or herpes.
Right. The material noted they often don't have cures. Treatment is more about managing symptoms or suppressing the virus.
Which really underlines the source's focus on prevention, particularly for those viral infections.
Absolutely.
So when you pull it all together from the material you gave us, understanding these unique anatomical bits, the precise hormonal timing,
The different contraception mechanisms and effectiveness and how STIs differ based on their cause.
it's all just fundamental for your health literacy, right? For making informed decisions.
It really is. It shows how interconnected it all is. And, as you think about this information, just consider the incredible precision needed in that hormonal regulation the sources described.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Tiny shifts in timing or amount can completely change the outcome, whether ovulation happens, if a pregnancy is supported. It just showcases the body's truly astonishing and delicate hormonal choreography.